Hello all, this is John from eastcoastarmory.com, and I'm here today with a video update for this 1/6 scale Dragon German Panzer II. A common question that I frequently receive is, when I'm working on my 1/6 scale projects, exactly what type of adhesives do I use? Now, there's no real simple answer to that because that depends on the type of project that I'm working on. If I'm working on an all-metal tank, for instance, say like an Armor Tech or a Field of Armor model, I will be using less adhesives, but I will be using mostly maybe CA and more reliance though on actual soldered materials or even fasteners. But on a DML project like this, which is all made out of plastic, I use the same type of adhesives that I use on my 1/35 scale models, which would be the Testors, red tube, tooling-based monoglue. It's a bit simple compared to what most people use. They use some kind of a plastic cement, but I've been using this stuff for close to 15 years now, and I've had no issues with it. In addition to the plastic monoglue, I also use Great Plains Pro Thick CA. The Thick CA is pretty much what I use on all of my 1/6 scale projects, from Dragons to scratch-built vehicles to even radio-controlled Armor Techs. The CA and the model glue are used in tandem and help each other out. The model glue itself bonds the plastic together, and the CA adds longevity to the bond, as well as holds the component on a lot more thoroughly than, say, the model glue would alone. But for this build, I've been using both, and I've been using my other 1/35 scale and 1/6 scale Dragon kits, and I've had success with it in the past. Since the last video, the model's hull has been assembled, and the running gear is just about completed. A quick walk around the vehicle will show the progress that has been made so far. To start with the model's hull, as what was discussed in the previous video, the model's hull is comprised of the floor plate, the hull sides, and the rear wall, as well as the front transmission cover. Also, that was added was the tank's front fenders, or side fenders. For me, this was the basic starting point to which to add the suspension to. The model itself is glued together, but in addition to the glue, the kit also gives you several fasteners, Phillips head screws, wood screws more specific, and these are what bolt the sides to the lower hull together. Now, the screws are a nice feature, however, there are really more or less support for the actual adhesives that are used to really hold the thing together. This fastener type style construction was also used on the model's side fenders. While I was assembling the hull, I did have some minute fit problems. These problems, though, were not a real issue and were easily resolved with these C-clamps here, or these type of clamps that I have here. I positioned them on the front, the middle, and the rear part of the vehicle, and then once the glue set, I was able to remove the clamps, which held everything in their proper place. The clamps, along with the fasteners and the glues, really hold the hull together nicely. On my vehicle, on this portion here and this portion here, I had a small shift where the two panels didn't really line up. To fix this, some minor body work was done to the two halves, and as we could see, it is completely seamless, and you cannot tell that I had any type of a shift issue with these rear plates. In addition to performing the body work on these two rear cheek pieces, I also added simulated weld beads to the tank's lower hull on the places where the hull joins together. If you when you assemble the hull, you will have seam lines that run this direction towards the front and along the sides. To cover up the seams, I covered it over with sculpted weld beads. These weld beads offer detail, cover up the seam, and also give the model a little bit more strength. The weld beads were added to the sides over here, the side portion of the lower hull here. They follow the cheek and the lower rear hull panel. And on the front of the vehicle, the welds continue and move up the tank's transmission cover. The welds, if you notice, were even added to the 3 support brackets that would have been welded to the plate, the side hull plate, and the transmission cover itself. These welds are absent from the kit, and when added, give the model some more detail. Moving on to the tank's rear, we have here a crossbar that mounts from one side of the hull directly to the other. This bar is typically found on Panzer I's and Panzer II's. The kit does supply you with the bar itself, which is plastic. However, the bar seemed a little too thick from my taste, so I replaced it with a brass rod. The brass rod, I feel, is a better choice in that it's stronger and it just has an overall more crisper look to it as opposed to the kit supplied plastic rod. Another thing about the brass is that, say if you're picking up the model in this type of position, the brass is a lot more stronger, and the plastic version might crack if, say, you're carrying the model in this type of format. One mod that has already been made to the model is the way the fenders and the fender supports mount to the vehicle. The Dragon kit simply wants you to glue the fender mount, which is molded separately, to the fender. Now, the kit itself has 3 molded little rounded nubs over here on the part that mounts to the hull and is somewhat soft in detail. Another thing is that I didn't feel that glue alone would support the fenders on. These fenders here are in a very snaggable position and might bend and twist, and if it's just held on with adhesives, I feel that the bond would crack or would cause problems. So to correct this, I replaced the molded on nubs with small brass fasteners, like this one here that I got from a hobby shop, and they're mounted to the hull via bolts that are on the inside. This is the inside portion of the hull, and here we can see the brass fasteners with nuts securing the fender mounts and the fenders to the tank's lower hull. This mod gives a lot more structural integrity to the lower hull, as it adds somewhat of a backbone, and will prevent the piece from breaking off or bending if it gets snagged by, say, a passerby or any other obstruction. Prior to the addition and the modification and the installation of the tank suspension, some mods were needed and some prep work was made to the lower hull. These will be discussed now. Here are some shots of the hull before I installed the suspension. If you notice that the lower hull has been primed, painted with its base coat, and has some basic weathering on it. I like to weather and paint the base coat on the lower hull and suspension parts before installation because due to the really complicated shape of the suspension pieces, painting them when fully assembled is a little bit problematic, and you will always have a spot left unpainted or two. By painting everything beforehand and installing everything in one unit, you're sure to have an equal amount of paint covering every little crevice. The Panzer II had several bump stops mounted to the lower hull. These bump stops were to prevent the suspension swing arm from overstretching. The bump stop consists of a mounting plate with a tube mounted to it that emerges from the plate, as well as a rubber pad that would be bolted to the steel rod. The DML kit gives you these bump stops as a piece to glue on. However, it is unsure if the DML kit omitted a piece to save on costs that would be glued to it, or if they have a typo in their instructions, because over here we have the original piece that's still mounted to a runner as a spare. This little piece here is either intended to be the rubber pad molded in, or is the half of the item in that another plastic part would have been glued over this part here. The DML kit, as per the instructions, wants you to install this part to the vehicle via this molded in pad pointing upward, like the way I have it here. However, this will not be very effective at stopping the swing arm, as the rubber pad is not being hit by the swing arm itself. So to rectify this is a simple fix. Rather than following the instructions, you can simply install the pieces upside down, but in the same format that they want you to install them. For instance, the bump stop here in the middle are pointing, the triangle pieces pointing to the bottom of the vehicle, and for the rest, like this one, and this one, you can have that little triangle brace pointing to the top of the vehicle here. Another modification that I made to the bump stops is I enhanced the detail on the rubber pad area from the molded in one. To do this, I cut a small length of PVC tube. That's the exact same width of the actual rubber pad, and I mounted it over the DML rubber pad itself. This new replacement rubber pad gives the piece more standalone feature to it, in that it's bigger and it's more present, and it looks more like the real piece. Another piece of detail that was added to the bump stop was the addition of the mounting hex bolt detail here. Each pad is held in place via via 4 straps and 4 hex bolts. This is done to every single bump stop on both sides of the vehicle.